Welcome back to Reaching Higher. I'm your host, Aaron Strout, and today's episode is one I have genuinely been looking forward to for a long time. Before I introduce our guest, I want to give a very special thank you to Missy Veroniak, Jeff Curtis, and Jenny Safransky. Without their help orchestrating this conversation, this episode simply wouldn't have happened. So thank you to all three of you. Now today's guest. She was born in Los Angeles to Vietnamese parents who emigrated from Saigon after the Vietnam War. She lost her mother at just 14 years old, and in 2004, she was diagnosed with neuromyelitis optica, a rare autoimmune condition that gradually robbed her of most of her vision by 2007. And yet, in 2012, she walked onto the MasterChef stage as the first blind contestant in the show's history. She cooked her way through Gordon Ramsay's toughest challenges and won. Season 3 champion. No culinary school degree, just extraordinary palate, relentless focus, and an unshakable will. Since then, she's become a New York Times bestselling author, a restaurateur in Houston, a Helen Keller Personal Achievement Award recipient, and an advocate for people with disabilities on platforms ranging from the American Embassy to the United Nations. She's proof that things the world calls disadvantages can become your greatest strengths, and she's here today to talk about all of it. Please welcome Chef Christine Ha. Well, Chef Ha, I am thrilled to have you here today. As I mentioned in our little pre-conversation, I'm a big fan. I think we're probably going to have a lot of big fans that are listening in and watching, but thank you for taking the time to join us today.
It's my pleasure.
So we have a lot of questions. I'm going to jump right in because I'm really eager to hear the answer to these.
Sure.
The first of which is, and I always like to try to get a little bit of the origin story, but you were born in Los Angeles to Vietnamese parents who had emigrated from Saigon after the Vietnam War.
Mhm.
You lost your mother to lung cancer early, age 14. I'm so sorry, and I'm sure that was incredibly hard. But I would love to know, going through that unique set of circumstances, how did that shape your relationship with food and cooking, given the fact that it's kind of a big part of your life now?
Yeah, well, growing up, obviously having a Vietnamese family, I ate a lot of great home cooked Vietnamese food. After my mom passed away, I moved back to Los Angeles because my parents actually moved to Houston when I was a toddler for work. And then after my mom passed away, I moved back to Los Angeles to be around more family. So then I was living with my grandmother, my grandfather, my aunts, and they cooked a lot of Vietnamese food. And so I grew up, of course, eating a lot of very delicious, humble, home cooked Vietnamese food, but I took it all for granted. And it wasn't until after losing my mom, growing up, moving away to college, and eating dorm food that I realized I really missed that Vietnamese home cooking. So it was at that point when I decided to teach myself how to cook and try to recreate a lot of the dishes I had eaten growing up, just simply by memory. At that time in my life, I did have vision. So I bought cookbooks, read the printed cookbooks, and just tried my hand at cooking in the kitchen. But I would say just having the Vietnamese upbringing really gave me an appreciation for Vietnamese food. And then losing my mom at a young age made me realize how, uh, I guess, precious it was to try to recreate her dishes because I could no longer have them.
Well, beautifully said. And I can only imagine. I lost both my parents over the last several years. Fortunately, I had them for a majority of my life. So I can't imagine what that would have been like at such a young age. But I agree with you. Like, there are certain dishes that my mother-in-law, who's also no longer with us, or my mother would make that it's like, oh, I miss that deeply. And to your point, you go off to college, and you're like, I didn't realize how good I really had it.
Hmm.
So, um, I do want to talk a little bit about the vision piece, right? We'll sort of thread this through because this is an important piece of who you are. But in 2004, and hopefully I don't butcher this, you were diagnosed with something called neuromyelitis optica. Did I say that correctly?
Yes, you did.
Um, and so this led to you gradually losing most of your vision by 2007. Talk a
Yes.
little bit about what the transition was like and how you found your way back into the kitchen. I know you touched on it a little bit with the cookbooks and, sort of having that memory of them beforehand, but maybe give us a little bit more information on that.
Yeah, so the vision loss coincided with the time in my life where I started really becoming an avid home cook. And every time I lost a little bit more vision, I would have to kind of go back to the drawing board and relearn how to do simple tasks in the kitchen, like holding a knife properly, chopping a vegetable, dealing with the hot fire on the stove. And I just had to relearn it over and over again as I gradually lost my vision, because maybe one year my vision would be at a certain baseline, and then I would have a couple bouts of optic neuritis or inflammation of the optic nerve, and I would lose a little more vision. And then that became my new baseline. So I always had to kind of go back to the beginning and learn how to do things with less and less vision. But for me, I think the vision loss gave me a different sort of nuanced appreciation for food. Obviously, presentation or how the dish looks became less important to me, although I understand as a chef, the food and the presentation, how it looks on a plate, is still very important, because they always say people eat with their eyes first. But for me, I think about texture and temperature and the contrast of different flavors inside a bite, probably more so than a sighted person would, because maybe they're a little bit more distracted by the visual appearance of a dish. So for me, I think I always focus more on those aspects and the balance of a bite rather than a sighted cook. But I think what it really taught me, losing my vision while I was teaching myself how to cook, was the resilience of our human bodies and our minds. If we really have a will, and we will find a way to achieve whatever goals we have, regardless of whatever challenges that may come our way. So I think that's the bigger lesson, is learning just how resilient we are as human beings.
Well, I want to dig into that because you touched on it. And so, for anyone that doesn't know Chef Christine Ha, um, you won MasterChef season 3 in 2012, which it's a hard feat for anyone that has not watched the show. It's Gordon Ramsay, and it's essentially like American Idol, but cooking. You had never formally studied cooking, as you just mentioned. You were the first blind contestant to ever compete, probably one of the few, considering, again, you're walking a very sort of high tightrope, right, to do all this stuff. Gordon
Mhm.
Ramsay praised you as your palate as something even a Michelin-starred chef don't normally possess. What do you think your loss of sight gave you in the kitchen? I know you just talked about that texture piece, but that sighted cooks may take for granted.
I think one is focus. I know that during the competition, I felt like my what people thought was a disadvantage of vision loss eventually became a strength for me, and it was because I wasn't as distracted by what the other cooks next to me were cooking. So I didn't pay attention to what the other contestants were making at their station, what sort of elevated techniques they were using, what sort of high-end ingredients they were cooking with. And so all I really did and could do was focus on what was at my own station, what dish I was cooking, and try to make it the best dish that I could. So I think for one, I was able to focus more on the challenge at hand and not lose my way, and not, for example, mentally psych myself out and think like, oh, I need to change my dish halfway through the challenge because I need to use a better ingredient since so and so is using foie gras or something super fancy, and I'm over here, I don't know, using like canned crab or something like that. So I think one thing is focus. And then, like I'd mentioned, I just really pick apart a bite when I have it. And I think all about the different contrast of textures and the balance of flavors. Is it sweet enough, salty enough? Is there slight bitterness, spice? All of these things kind of wrapped up into the couple bites I have as I taste my way through a dish. So I would say like that. Those are my advantages, but of course, like there are still a plethora of disadvantages of not being able to see in the kitchen.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I know I'll just sort of duck into this a little bit because I think because you don't have the same sight ability as other chefs, you do use technologies like voiceover,
Hmm.
JAWS or JAWS, air glasses. Um, Talk a little bit about that. Like, did that take a while to sort of figure out how to use those? Are you still always looking for new tools and techniques to be able to help you, sort of stay up with because every chef has to keep an eye on technology, right? And so you're using
Yes.
that and these things in addition to that.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely am always on the hunt for new technology to help just not just the visually impaired, but just chefs. And I think someone now who has restaurants and fully in the culinary industry with restaurants, it's the industry is very old school. Like people are still using paper and pen spreadsheets to do inventory counts. So my husband, who's also my business partner, he actually comes from a tech background. He's been dabbling with things like AI tools and learning how to code with AI and trying to make things like inventory management or pricing and costing out recipes and all of these things more convenient and just easier and takes less time for our team. So there's always things like that that I'm looking for to make life easier. And I think we're in the day and age where technology is advancing exponentially. So it's really cool, but it's also very scary and it can be intimidating. But of course, like, yeah, I'm still looking for the technology that helps a vision impaired cook just manage things better in the kitchen. Like, one of the hardest things for me is baking because I can't see what's going on in the oven, and different temperatures, different humidity levels in the air affect how something turns out in the oven. And a lot of times it is very visual. Of course, you do depend on your sense of smell a lot, but I won't know if the bread is rising properly or not, and I won't know if, like, the cake is turning out correctly or the pie crust is turning golden in the oven unless I open it and maybe test. But if I test the temperature, I'm poking a hole in the pastry or the bread, and then if you open the oven, you're like lowering the temperature, so it's very finicky. So there are things like thermometers that you can put into your item that's in the oven that has a cord or that comes out of the oven, and it may link as a Bluetooth to your an app on your phone, but sometimes those apps are not accessible. So there's always things that I think are important when people are should think about when they're designing these types of apps and technology, is thinking about universal design, is that it should be able to work for everybody regardless of ability.
Well, I love that answer, and it's funny. It's nice that you and your husband do complement each other in terms of the technology and the food, because I think that is the winning formula these days, right? It is the how do you build the better mousetrap, but how do you supplement the things that you already naturally do well? And
Mhm.
that is an interesting thing because I had never really thought about baking. Where you're right, if you're cooking something in a saute pan or a soup or even a grill, you can cut off a little piece, because that's the other thing too, is it doesn't look as visually exciting if you have a big finger taken out of the cake or the bread or
Yep.
whatever. So
Hmm.
um, I want to talk a little bit about your cookbook. So you wrote something called Recipes from My Home Kitchen. Became a New York Times bestseller, so congratulations on that.
Thanks.
You hold an MFA in creative writing from the University of Houston. Let's talk a little bit about how storytelling and food intersect for you. Is cooking a form of writing, or are they separate languages?
They're similar. I think they're both very much in a way an art form, a way of self-expression. There is a little bit of science or technique to both. So you do have to use techniques in the kitchen. You do use writing techniques to formulate a story. But for me, I realized the correlation later after winning MasterChef that these are the two things that are really important to me. But why? There must be a similarity. And it's about communication and self expression and learning about relationships with other people. So for me, I think when I sit down and write a story, for example, or write a cookbook, which right now I'm working on my second cookbook, and the second one is very much more narrative driven and memoir like. So it's me communicating my story, my upbringing as a Vietnamese American woman here in the United States. And when people read these stories or these notes behind all of these recipes, they'll get to learn more about who I am as a person and understand me more, even if they have never stepped foot in Texas or they have never had Vietnamese food before. In the same vein, I think cooking, when I sit down and I taste someone else's food, let's say I travel to another country in South America or something, and I am fortunate and I get to meet someone and they cook me a home cooked meal, or I go to a restaurant where a lot of people eat regularly on the daily, and I get to try the foods that people eat every day. And then I understand more about that culture, like what are the ingredients that are important to them? What are the techniques or the tools in the kitchen that they use a lot? Why do they use these tools? Why are these ingredients prevalent in their cuisine? And then I just learned more about the background of the people of that region. So I think really it's about learning how we as human beings are more alike than we are different, no matter where we're from or what kind of background we've grown up in. And stories or words and food and cooking have the abilities to do that.
Well, I love how you brought that together because I couldn't agree more. I've, traveled some, still have a lot more travel left in me, but I do feel like food is always that thing that tells the story of the locale and the
Hmm.
culture and sort of how you got there. So that really sort of crystallized it in my head as you said that. Speaking of, I know that you've served as a culinary arts envoy for the American Embassy in places like Jordan, Serbia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, and Croatia. And you've spoken about disability advocacy at the United Nations. What's the message you most want the world to hear when you're, given these platforms talking about your disability or overcoming these disabilities, and probably the respect of what you would like for people to know about you and the community so that they can sort of let you be the best version of yourself?
My message for all of the people who ever hear me speak or what I'm about is really that people with various abilities or disabilities can live very purposeful, fulfilling lives and meet their goals and achieve their vision so long as there's a network of support out there. So, whether that's a healthcare team or vocational rehabilitation counselors or financial aid or um, whatever it may be, I think as long as there are adaptive resources for to meet people where they are, people can really flourish in whatever it is that they're meant to do on this earth.
I love that message. That's really a powerful one. Speaking of, in 2014, you received the Helen Keller Personal Achievement Award from the American Foundation for the Blind, an honor previously given to some names that I think people on the show are going to recognize in Ray Charles, Stevie Wonder, and Patty Duke. So, what does that recognition mean to you personally, and what responsibility, knowing you're in this some pretty amazing company, do you feel it carries?
I think it's interesting because it's called the Personal Achievement Award, but for me, I feel like it's kind of a designation saying personal achieving award. Like you still haven't achieved everything and you shouldn't rest on your laurels and there's still a lot more to do. So to me it's almost like a reminder of saying like, okay, I've done ABC, but there's still XYZ to do in the terms of advocacy for the vision impaired. So I think for me it's just a reminder like yes, it's a nice recognition, but it doesn't mean that that's where it's the end all be all and that's not where I should rest, but there's still a lot more work to be done. And hopefully, if people hear the message and become allies and help move the needle forward, like our community and our world can be in a better place later than it is today.
That's a great answer. By the way, I forgot to mention this up front. So I had Chef Aaron Sanchez on a few weeks ago, and I mentioned that you were coming on, and also another famous Texas chef, Aaron Franklin, who's going to be joining us
Ah,
in the fall. But he had very kind things to say about both of you, and he remembered you from your experience on MasterChef, and
yes.
was very, sort of fond of it. So I just wanted to make sure I convey that because
Yeah,
it's always
Ron's
nice to.
great. He's
He,
such a nice guy. I love him.
he really is. I mean, one of the things I said to him is, I don't know if you've ever taken in, I'll say taken in because, the seeing part is a little bit tricky, but um, the show Wildcard Kitchen, it's a sort of newer one. And it's the idea of combining like gambling with cooking and then, chefs judging you blindly. And he
Interesting.
was on it and he lost, but he was very sort of introspective. Where some of the other chefs were like, oh, if they only knew that like they had taken this away from me or I had to cook the whole thing in a blender. And I said to him, is that your Buddhist roots? Because he is a Buddhist. And he just was so like down to earth about everything. And so I agree with you. I love his perspective and I love
Yeah.
his Zen-ness. And I think you've got a lot of those same Zen qualities. So good company to be in. I want to talk a little bit about your Houston restaurant. So speaking of, it's a gastropub in Houston called the Blind Goat. And I love the brilliance of this. A name, I believe, combining your disability and your Vietnamese zodiac sign. It was named a James Beard semifinalist for Best New Restaurant in America in 2020. How did you approach building a restaurant concept that felt authentically you?
Well, I have gone out to eat in a lot of places in my lifetime, and I wanted to build a place that is a cornerstone of the community that I put it in. I want it to be fully representative of me. One, it was like I wanted to answer to a lot of the followers who've been following me since my journey on MasterChef, who have really been asking over several years, when am I going to open up something so they could taste my food? I didn't start the restaurant, the first iteration of the restaurant, until 7 years after being on the show. And it's because I fully know that just because I'm a great home cook and I can pull off a fancy dinner for, a table of 10 in my home is totally different than running a restaurant, because that is a business and a big operation where day in and day out you're making food like hundreds and hundreds of times over and over. So I wanted to take my time. And then an opportunity kind of came to me to start with a station inside a food hall. So it was a very small footprint. The initial investment was smaller. So I decided to try that. And then we kind of outgrew that space and kept going. And then in 2023, we moved it into its own brick and mortar. So the Blind Goat, to me, it's I describe it as a modern Vietnamese eatery that takes a lot of the flavors of the Vietnamese food that I grew up eating, but putting a modern spin on it. Because I've traveled a lot all over the world, there's different influences of different cuisines in my dishes. So, of course, being in Texas and in Houston, which is on the Gulf Coast, there's going to be Cajun influence. There's going to be Gulf Coast seafood influence. There's going to be Texas barbecue, Tex-Mex, all of these things. And my husband, who's Korean American, there's also Korean influence on the menu. So for me, it's kind of taking the things I admire about each of these different cuisines and incorporating them into my Vietnamese background and dishes. And then I wanted to create a space that felt modern. I wanted people, when they come, to feel like they're dining beachside in Vietnam, but in a Houston modern chic environment. So, we have a full bar with craft cocktails, and I wanted that experience to be different because in Houston, which is the most diverse city in America, we have quite a lot of Vietnamese people who live here, and they're of my parents' and grandparents' generation. They've opened a lot of fantastic Vietnamese restaurants, serving like noodle soups and sandwiches and vermicelli bowls. And I did not want to compete against that, nor did I knew that I wouldn't be able to compete against that. But that's a different story to tell of that generation and of that culture. And for me, because I'm authentically an American born woman with a Vietnamese background and heritage, what does that make my culinary story, or what's that mean for me gastronomically? So for me, it's like, what I had told you, what's on the menu. So I wanted to take all of that and put it into a place that felt truly me. And how I answer that question really is like, do I want to eat this dish? Do I want to spend time in this restaurant? And I do. And that's kind of my compass on how I always figure out, like, is this a dish I want to put on the menu, or what do I want to do to this restaurant? How do we want to decorate this restaurant? What's the vibe? What's the music? Like, I curate the playlist that plays in the restaurant. So for me, that's how I make the restaurant truly me and representative of who I am.
Well, it sounds amazing, and I actually pulled up your restaurant homepage while we were talking. And just for people listening, this will drop this Friday, but we're doing the interview on Tuesday, and so Tuesday's weekly special is a TBG cheeseburger, which is a 5-ounce char grilled short rib patty with miso, caramelized onions, white American cheese, house made pickles, sriracha mayo, and toasted challah bun, served with a side of crispy cut fries. So one, I'm very hungry now. Two, I love like looking at your specials, just what a great job you did at threading that needle of bringing the Texas, because you have the frite, you have the ribs, but bringing obviously those Asian inspired, Vietnamese inspired influences to it. So I will have to make a point of getting there at some point in time. We have a couple more serious questions, and then we have some more fun questions that I like to ask all the guests, and then we'll wrap up. So we talked about the Helen Keller International earlier. So you now serve on the board of trustees, and you continue advocating for people with disabilities. For someone who is newly facing vision loss, right? So we talked about in general, what's the platform and what do you want to sort of, what message do you want to send out? But someone that's facing a new disability, that affects their passion, whether it's cooking or anything else, what's the most important thing you want them to know?
First and foremost, I know what it's like because I've been in those shoes. So I would always want to tell them that it is okay to grieve the loss of your vision. uh, Grief is important. You have to go through the cycle of it. And you shouldn't skip over that and immediately think like, oh, I'll be fine, because it is hard. You have to acknowledge and give respect to that side of your mind that wants to be sad or wants to perhaps question why this is happening to you. But also at the same time, I think at some point after the grief, you need to figure out how to pick up the pieces and move forward, because something that was really hard for me, that I learned during my time of losing my vision, was that the world is going to continue rotating on its axis. The sun will continue to rise and set, and the years will continue to go by, and it doesn't wait for you. So you can either drop out of society and continue to feel sorry for yourself and be depressed, or you need to figure out a way to put yourself back out there and figure out what your next chapter is, or what your purpose is in life, and regardless of whatever the challenges may be. So for me, I say take the process seriously of going through the motions of grieving the loss of your vision, then finding the right resources and network and support team around you to help you pick up those pieces and move forward. And I think the most important thing is to learn to celebrate the small victories. I think oftentimes, and I'm guilty of this myself, is growing up, I think being Asian American and having immigrant parents, they always drilled the importance of perfection and making good grades and education and being a respectable person in society. Those things were always drilled into me, being who I am. So for me, I always felt like I was not good enough or achieving enough all the time. It doesn't matter if I won MasterChef, like what's the next thing? And I forget sometimes that there's really a lot to be celebrated in the small joys or the small victories and the small steps and progresses that we make each day. So, for example, when I lost my vision, I went from being able to make an entire Thanksgiving meal for my family to suddenly barely being able to put together a peanut butter jelly sandwich that wasn't neat, and not having the jelly falling all over the counter or the floor. And I was really upset. But then I just kept at it. And then, okay, so then maybe the next week, maybe the sandwich wasn't perfect, but it had, maybe the jelly stayed inside the sandwich bread. And then the week after that, maybe I was able to make a scrambled egg and eat it with toast. So then I turned on the stove. And then the week after that, I was able to cut an apple. And so when I look back, I realized, oh, I wasn't able to do this yesterday or last week or 6 months ago. And then you realize that you're making this progress, and then you think, okay, you don't think you're making progress because it seems so slow, but if you really think back, you are. And when you celebrate those small victories, I think it also does something in your mind where you feel encouraged and motivated, and feel like you are enabled and empowered to keep moving forward. So I think that's important, is also remembering to celebrate the small victories.
Well, that's a great message, and I love the way you framed it. And if you heard me chuckling, or the guests or the listeners hear me chuckling, I'm laughing with you, not at you, because just that idea of you trying to make a peanut butter jelly sandwich, and the jelly. I mean, it's hard for anyone to make the sandwich without getting the jelly to drip all over the counter. But it does help frame that visual. I do want to ask you one more sort of serious question, then we'll get to some of the lighter questions I asked all the guests. So, you do support a number of other charitable efforts like Easter Seals in Southern California, kids' meals via your restaurant in Houston, and No Barriers USA. If people want to go and support you in any of these places, do you have a preference? And where do they go to engage with you or to donate? So I know I just threw a lot at you, and we'll also put some of those in the show notes. So,
Well, sure. I mean, there's obviously, since I serve on the board for Helen Keller International, I have a link to donate to them, and you do worldwide work on trying to combat vision impairment and vision loss, especially in children. But there's a link on my Instagram, for example, that you can donate to them. But of course, like, I love supporting different causes. Like, I love dogs. I love the elderly. I love Asian Americans or women or people of color, and all these different causes. So I would say the best thing is just follow me on social media. I'm on many avenues. My handle is The Blind Cook. And then just see like what I'm supporting at that time and figure out what calls to you, like what sort of advocacy work or cause do you want to support and then link up with that.
Well, that's great. Again, we'll make sure we put those in the show notes. And I'm just taking a quick peek at her Instagram and lots of fun, very different types of videos and posts up there. So nice job on that. I do want to get into some of these questions that, like I said, are a little more lighter hearted. And the first one, because I always like to sort of help people fill up their streams or their podcasts or whatever show or podcast that you're binging right now. Ideally, something on the lighter side.
Oh, I listen to so much serious stuff. I will say I listen to quite frequently The Daily Show on YouTube,
Hmm.
the snippets on there,
Yep.
because that is really how I make light of a lot of the very serious stuff going on in this world. And then I would say, like, show wise, I'm really into Abbott Elementary. I don't watch any cooking shows because, God forbid, like, everyone's like, do you watch The Bear or are you watching Top Chef? I'm like, food is kind of my life. I go to television to escape that. So I'm really into Abbott Elementary.
Well, that's a good one, and we've watched a few episodes. My daughter, who absolutely loves it, and keeps sort of beating us on that one, but we probably need to get back to that. And I do love the Daily Show. Just to sort of cross reference again, I guess. So I had a woman who's running for U.S. Senate in Michigan named Mallory McMorrow, and she wrote a book called Hate Won't Win, and she was on with Desi Letic. Desi Letic, if you
Yeah.
people have not seen her before, is the funniest and just does like the best skits, but also is an amazing interviewer. So I agree with you. Daily Show, we all need more of it in our lives, regardless of what side you sit on, because it is a fun way to look at the world, which is a little bit crazy right now. So I want to ask you another question, knowing that you've met a lot of people in your life, but out of the famous people you've met, who has impressed you the most?
Oh, this is gonna sound so cliche and obvious, but it might have to be Chef Ramsay. So Gordon, because I've had a lot of interaction with him because I go back quite regularly for guest appearances, he is a huge celebrity, as we know, but he's so down to earth, so funny, and extremely charismatic. People always ask, like, does he put on that show for TV? And I'm like, no, that really is him. And I think that's what makes him so great for television. But he's so caring. Like, will take the time out to make a short video for your team back home or a friend back home who's really a big fan that never got to meet him. Or, I'm currently I'm the subject of a documentary film project, an independent one that's been filming since 2019, and it's about my life story. And he agreed this year to do an interview for the
Wow.
documentary, so that's exciting.
Well, I'm excited about do you know when the documentary is coming out?
We're still in the process of filming and stuff, so that's really a question for my producers. I don't know yet.
Well, I will keep an eye open for that because I would love to see it, and that is very cool. I don't know if you've ever, you probably don't because you say you don't watch cooking shows. Maybe this isn't really a cooking show, but it's called Hot Ones, and the
Oh yeah,
idea
yeah,
is
yeah.
so
I
he's
do
been on
listen
it
to
a
that.
couple of times, and he essentially is
Yes.
like my kids kind of like baited me into doing it, and he was very much that sort of terse. I'm upset, you're doing things wrong, but at the same time, I think it is because he cares, and so that is good to know that he does these things and is a good human being on top of all that. So thank you for
Yes.
sharing that. All right, two more. Your biggest regret.
Not learning how to cook from my mom and just not asking my parents more questions about their past before they passed away.
Oh, that's a tough one, but I hear you on that. And again, I lost my parents over the last several years, and there's still things. My daughter gave me this book, and it's basically a book that it's like, Dad, tell us your stories, and it goes all the way back to when you were born. And I'm like, I don't know, like my aunt maybe could answer some of these questions, but some of them
Yeah.
I really would like to have asked my mom. So that's a
Yeah.
sweet one, and what a nice way to pay tribute to your parents. All right, the last one is which band or artist, from a concert perspective, would you most like to have attended? Ideally, one that's no longer around.
That's a great question because I actually ask that as an icebreaker when I meet
Oh, do
people.
you? I love
Yes,
it.
and I've never gotten this question before. So I know exactly who would answer. Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers,
Oh, that's a good one.
Queen,
Yeah,
the original Queen,
the original Queen.
and Prince.
Well, Prince has come up before, and actually, it's funny. Chef Aaron Sanchez cooked for him when he
Wow.
was at House of Blues, and so he tells a funny story on the podcast. Tom Petty is a great one, and I think he may have actually mentioned Tom Petty as well. So clearly, this is a great chef and great musicians kind of thing. And I love the fact, Christine, that you ask these questions as your icebreakers. It's always a fun one to. I've talked to a lot of smart people in my day, and these are the types of questions that always get people wrapped around the axle. I'm like, this is really just to sort of hear how you think. There's no right answer or wrong answer to it. So
Yeah.
those are great. Well, and by the way, one last thing that I meant to say to you is, I know it's not Freddie Mercury, but Queen with Adam Lambert. I saw them, I think, 2 or 3 years ago.
I did too. I did too.
They're pretty fabulous. Okay, so
Yeah.
you know that while it's not the same, Adam does a
Yes.
pretty good job at channeling his inner Freddie. So
Yes. I guess I'll never know for sure, though.
we will never know for sure. Well, I mean, you watch on YouTube. There is their their live at Live Aid, and just what an amazing sort of performance they give. And so we can get a little bit of an idea when we look that up. Maybe I'll throw that in as a little bonus as one of the show notes. But Christine, thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you for doing all that you do and helping people feel like they can live that sort of great life that they're meant to. I love that idea of like the little wins. That's really helpful. So, and I can't wait to maybe meet you in person at some point, maybe down at your restaurant in Houston.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Erin. It's fun.
Of course, of course.